Hey, everybody. This is Dr. John back with my partner in life and love, Joree Rose. And today on Love Isn't Enough, we are titillated to be talking about sex, what goes into a fantastic sex life.
What goes into just took my image in my head somewhat. John, we know what goes in where. We're not giving some basics on
Do
sex.
we, do we, do they? We can't make assumptions.
And then I also have the thought in my head from that song, let's talk about sex,
Oh,
baby.
always.
Yeah. Anyhow, we'll just leave that sound, the sound effects in the background.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to focus. I love talking about sex.
I know you do.
I know you do, that I know, but I know. Uh, but what I love talking about it because couples don't.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a fascinating conversation to bring to the table or to the bedroom to be able to understand a little bit more of, as you so visually put it, what goes into it.
Yes. Well, and I mean, just what keeps us from talking about sex, I think how we're brought up, right? That there's shame, there's embarrassment involved. And a lot of the people that I've talked to in the past, and myself included for many years in my life, were embarrassed to even say the words
Yeah.
with our partner. And if
Well,
you can't say the words, how are you going to talk about what you want, what would feel better?
I remember my sister tells the story of someone she knew in high school who would go around and whisper in people's ears, vagina. Because it's funny, because we don't say the words, right? We
Yeah.
don't say the words of body parts, right? We have nicknames that either are crude or depersonalized. And I mean, right off the bat, this is something for couples to consider is how do we name each other's body
Mm-hmm.
parts? And do we agree on that?
Yeah.
And is it uncomfortable to say that? Do we have to be formal?
Well, and does what I call it make you laugh or make you feel like it's not sexy? Tits, boobs, boobies,
I don't like
breasts.
breasts. Breasts remind me of chicken.
Yeah, and so
I don't like breasts. Thank you for
it's
never
it's
using that
it's
word.
interesting because I think we have to agree on a common language where neither one of us have this ick association with it.
Well, and it's not just the ick personally, but sometimes a lot of the words can be derogatory, right? Don't be such a pussy,
Mm.
right? Or, obviously there's other harsher words, the C word, see you next Tuesday, as will sometimes refer to difficult people.
But I think we should really reclaim pussy, and I think the younger generation has, because it's it for so long it was used as an insult, and
Right.
yet it's really this body part in females that shows incredible resilience, incredible flexibility, incredible strength. I,
Empowerment.
yeah, it's I don't understand ever why it was an insult other than I think men wanted to dominate women.
Well, isn't that still the case of so many men, unfortunately?
Yeah.
So where do you want to begin?
Um, let's start at the beginning, like the beginning of the day, so to speak, or laying the groundwork for sort of what leads to great sex. And the reason I think start there is because I don't think a lot of men think of that. I think they think of it more short term.
I'm going to say women too, not just
Okay,
men.
fair enough. But I think that one of the things that we always share is that the brain is the biggest sex organ in the woman's body.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, that's a helpful reframe in terms of if I want to have sex with my partner, I need to be sort of laying the groundwork for that all day long by flirtatious texts, by doing kind deeds, by compliments, by showing appreciation and gratitude. Like to me, those are all the ways to get her brain in the mood.
And there's a lot of things that even if you were to do those, might still prevent, well, the brain might still have things that are preventing you or the woman from holding on to those kind acts and turning toward if there's unresolved issues, if
Mm-hmm.
there's a buildup of resentment, if there's unaddressed paper cuts that are still open wounds, whether they're really teeny tiny or whether they're bigger. Because I think if we don't address what are the barriers in specifically a woman's brain from allowing herself to literally open herself up mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, right? That's where I think it's really important to recognize. And I agree 100%. Sex starts the beginning of the day. I still always love that example that Abby Wambach gives with Glennon Doyle of, for her, sex is when Glennon brings her coffee in the morning.
I think it was intimacy. Yeah. But
It is intimacy, but that they defined sex as intimacy. And that was one of the ways that was most intimate. And
because only she knows how her partner likes her coffee.
And she's the only person who gets to do that.
Yeah.
So it's an intimate act. But if you do all these kind and intimate and loving, desirous acts towards me all day, and I still have unaddressed or unresolved wounds or paper cuts, it's not going to be really easy to even receive those things of kindness. Because we see this, right? I mean, we work with a lot of couples, we work with individually men and women, and we see those patterns and where there's a lot of kind acts being done that aren't received, which then gets into this negative cycle of rejection of you didn't even receive this as something kind, not knowing of what the barriers were to receiving. And then eventually those kind acts slow down, they stop, person feels rejected. I mean, it's a constant cycle we see, right?
Yeah. And I think, you mentioned paper cuts, and I think that the paper cuts is a big part of this, that it's those paper cuts that are the small hurts, annoyances, resentments that build up and accumulate over time, and that we don't address, that we just aren't very good at addressing and repairing. And so as a result, what happens is our perception of our partner goes from all or mostly positive to all or mostly negative. And then it affects how we interpret the other person's acts and intentions.
Right.
And we've seen it get so bad that you can do a kind act, someone does a kind act for their partner, and it's interpreted completely through a negative lens. And at that point, you're not getting lucky tonight. Right. In fact, we're, in those cases, it might have been years since they've been intimate.
And we've seen the whole gamut of frequency of intimacy. And I think I think today's conversation is going to jump all over the board, right? Because I think there's a lot of components that go into it. So starting with how do we even prime our brains and our bodies for being open to it? We recently saw something I shared with you. I forget now where I saw it. Maybe it was a post or something, that instead of asking the question, are you going to be available for sex tonight? It was more like, are you willing? How did that go? Do you remember what I shared with you? It was like, are you willing to be
to become more aroused?
To become more aroused, like right? Because I think
your arousal level.
I think what it was highlighting is, especially for women, it takes a long time for that arousal to go from non-aroused to an arousal state that they feel ready for sex.
And I think some of the research that we've read shows that for men, it's about 6 to 7 minutes, which seems like a long time for some men that I know. And for women, it was like 45.
Right. And that's to full arousal state.
Yeah.
And so instead of asking, are you aroused? Do you want to have sex? I loved that question of, are you willing to be open to being aroused?
Yeah. To increasing your arousal level, knowing that even if you increase the arousal level, if you think of it on a 1 to 10 scale and someone's at a 1, which is not aroused at all, that maybe you get to a 5, but that doesn't mean that it's going to result in sex.
Right.
It might just be cuddling.
Right. And I want to preface, as before we go any further into this conversation, there's no right or wrong here. And I think it can be really easy to be in comparison to perceptions of other couples, or maybe what you see on TV or in the movies, or even just an image in your own mind of what you think it should be. But really, we're talking about what is normal or / healthy for you as a couple.
Good qualifier. Yeah, because I think we all get hung up on how often, for instance, how often are we having sex? And one person's like, well, we should be having sex every day. And the other one's like, I don't really want to have sex every day. But there's been no clear-cut answer on what the average quantity.
No. And I think that's really, really important. It's what's normal for you. And the challenge we see is the difference between what is normal for a couple and the ideal for at least one person in that couple. Right. There often tends to be non-alignment when we see couples who are struggling with sex. One has a higher degree of desire for more frequency, and others can be like, once a month is fine.
Yeah.
And for some couples, once a week would not be okay. And there might be an expectation of,
or for some individuals.
Right. Right. So I just think it's important to have that qualifier. There's no normal here. And, I'm hoping that this conversation inspires couples to get a little bit more comfortable in the discomfort of talking about this, so that there can be greater intimacy, greater connection.
Greater repair.
greater ability to talk about what is hard. And I mean, look, if we can't talk about sex, then how good is the sex actually?
Because when you talk about intimacy, it's physical intimacy, but it's also being intimate on the level of communication, being intimate about how you feel.
Right.
And those are all wrapped together.
Right. Another important thing I want to qualify at the beginning of this too, even though we're now 10 minutes in, not so much the beginning anymore, but the definition of sex.
Mm.
Because,
wait, sex is just intercourse.
Some people actually think that. And I would say that's too narrow of a definition.
I agree.
And I'm a big fan of really having a broad definition because it allows for less expectation that anything you do as a sexual act needs to lead to intercourse. For some people, it's like that peak that you're trying to achieve. And then on top of that peak of intercourse is the peak of orgasm. And orgasm may not be a part of sex for many couples. Maybe it's age related, right? Maybe that's health related. Maybe it's just how they were raised, and it's a little bit of shame and religious upbringings. And again, there's no normal here. So I don't want anyone to ever feel like we're not having good sex because it's not frequent, or one or both of us don't orgasm, or I don't enjoy it. I mean, that'd be a problem.
Yeah, I remember when I was younger taking it very personally if my partner didn't orgasm.
Mm-hmm.
And
wait, you had partners before me. Damn you.
They were all make believe.
you,
and I think
you do have 4 children. I guess
as I've gotten older, I think I've been able to, and I've given this advice for years, like focus on the process over the outcome, focus on effort over outcome. And I think that's a good way to go in general. And I think it holds with sex too, that we want to focus on, if we can stay in the moment and focus on bodily sensations and pleasure and get less tied up in the orgasm as the end all be all of sex, we're going to be way better off. Partly
100%. Because
we need to relax into it in order to achieve that.
Which brings up another really great component to consider as a, dovetail off of, for women, the brain is the biggest sex organ, is we know that we're really disconnected from our bodies. And there's a great book called Better Sex Through Mindfulness by Dr. Lori Brado. And I actually have interviewed her on my podcast. And she did an amazing study in which it was determining the level of awareness women had of their own arousal state. And to determine this, they did a vaginal probe to detect blood flow inside the vagina while watching porn. And then when being questioned about their arousal state after watching porn, the women are like, nope, not turned on at all. It didn't really do anything for me. Well, in fact, the vaginal probe detected a higher level of arousal. And so that the takeaway there is that women are often so busy, so multitasking between families and kids and work and home and partner, and their own self is usually at the bottom of that list. We don't have time to attend to our own emotional needs, our own bodies. And we're able to be more productive when we don't. And so when it comes time for sex and intimacy, there literally is a very little muscle built on being able to access that level of, one way of calling it is interoception, right? Of tuning into the body and having awareness of bodily sensations.
Well, it's interesting. I love that study. I also think that, so we're disconnected from our body. We're also disconnected from our heart, i.e. our emotions. And it makes me think that it's not just the brain is the biggest sex organ. It's also the heart is the biggest sex organ. If, the brain is kind of thought, heart is emotion simplistically, then we need to get more in touch with how do we feel in our body? How's our physiology? And then how are we emotionally with our partner? What are the wounds that we need to address?
And that is a big barrier for many couples, right? I mean, if we're talking about how it's hard to talk about sex and how to name even body parts, but let's back up and say they're not even able to name their emotions related to the relationship, right? And so it's really easy to understand why couples are not having great sex. And I do love that quote by Esther Perel, which I've heard is actually not hers, but I've heard her say it, so I'll still quote her, which is, sex is emotion in motion. And without giving away too much details of our own sex life, because that'd be way too personal. I'm sure the listener does not want to hear about that. However, we have such deep emotional connection that it's been a fascinating journey of intimacy to see what happens when there is emotional safety, when there is emotional depth, when there is open communication, when there is healing and repairs, when there is not a buildup of resentment, when there is safety in eye contact. I mean, that's wild, right? A lot
I
of
would say
couples,
most don't have that.
and again, if this is you hearing this, it's not to be shame and judgment inducing. It's really an invitation to get curious. What's underneath my inability to look at my partner in the eye?
And how can we get better at that?
Because that eye gazing exercises, that's fucking vulnerable.
Yeah. Can you look someone straight in the eye for a minute or two?
Forget about a minute. A minute's a really long time.
Yeah.
10 seconds, 15 seconds without feeling the need to look away.
And that brings up another tangential point of who's doing the initiating for sex in the couple. And one of the things that crosses my mind frequently is that making the ask of, hey honey, would you be up for making love tonight? Hey honey, would you like to have sex tonight? Hey honey, I'm really desirous of you, can we? That act in and of itself, that ask is highly vulnerable. And
a lot of possibility for rejection there.
One of the things that happens is, one partner's into it, the other partner is not. And it's typically a pattern that we see where one person is doing more of the asking, another person is often not in the mood for whatever reason. And so they're saying no, 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 for a variety of reasons. The problem with that dynamic is, and this might be okay with one partner, but the problem with that dynamic is if you keep asking and the rejections keep piling up, eventually you get trained to just stop asking.
Right.
And so if you're shooting for no sex overall, that's a great way to go. But I don't think most people want that in their marriage, in their romantic relationship. And so I think just to be aware of this idea that to make the ask to initiate sex is a very vulnerable act, lets you have more compassion for the person doing the asking, and ideally would make you slightly more open to the invitation. Now,
ideally was the key word there.
Yeah. And there's details about how is the asking being done, when's it being done, what's the state of the relationship at that moment. But it's something that Joree and I work on. We work on responding positively to when the other person makes a request
of any kind,
intimacy,
or of any kind, truly. Yeah. But yeah, intimacy for sure.
And I think it's a great way to go to really work to, I'm really tired or I'm exhausted, but yeah, I would love to get intimate with you.
Right. And we know, we recently saw a sex researcher give a talk who's also a therapist, and he was laughing at the thought that most couples wait until they're most tired to begin to initiate sex. And, so that's a really important point to make of, if you're only thinking about sex as being able to happen at 10 o'clock once you get into bed, you're likely not going to be in the mood, because by the time you're ready for bed, you're likely ready for bed.
And what other important areas in your life do you leave till the last part of the day when you're absolutely exhausted?
Right.
And I would say that there's very few, if any.
Right. And maybe couples don't prioritize or value sex in their relationship. And so for them, that would be okay. But, here's another point that comes off of that for me. And it comes up with your great point about initiation. Is I've heard, two things come up. One is I hear from couples, there's an imbalance in that initiation. And one person feels, it'd be really nice if my partner initiated more. I feel like I'm always the one doing it. Be careful of the words like always or never. But if it's trending in the direction that one person is always initiating, and if that's getting met with some level of rejection, that's going to, a way to turn towards your partner would be to take turns in more mindful, awareness around having equal parts of initiation. But here's a piece that I see a lot of women getting hung up on. And this is a pattern which is truly a result of unresolved wounds, or those paper cuts that are still active, that have not had repair, in which they don't want sex because they don't feel safe emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually. They are angry, they're hurt, they feel unseen, they feel unheard. And while they may desire physical touch, and while they may desire sex even, they're not emotionally available for sex. And so if their partners come at them and give them a hug, I've heard this from multiple clients over the years where they'll say, I'm afraid to even give my partner a hug, even though I want one. And even though it feels good, but I'm not available for sex. And I'm afraid if I give him a hug, he's going to misinterpret it as my availability for sex. And so I'd rather not even give the hug. That's harsh.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad. And again, it's if this is something you experience, I'm not judging when I say you're doing something harsh. It's a harsh response for the partner who's not even able to get a hug, but it's a rejection. And yet I really want to honor when women don't feel available to be intimate. What could we do? So again, it's looking underneath the patterns, right? Yes, it's about sex, but it's not really about sex in that dynamic. It's about what are other ways we can connect so that I can be more available.
The other thing that crosses my mind that's somewhat related to this is the emotional tone of the recipient when one partner approaches the other and says, hey, I would love to make love tonight, are you available for that? Be aware of how you respond to that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because it's great if you can have enthusiasm. Yeah, I'd love to get naked with you tonight. Oh, I'd love that. Then it's, you can be kind of lukewarm, like, yeah, okay. And then you can be anywhere, like you can use any of the emotions in that response, but to be sort of dismissive or non-enthusiastic or resigned or let out a big sigh, like those are things that don't lend themselves to an upward emotional spiral, which lead to better sex.
Right. And oftentimes, I think it's going to be the case where in general, men are going to want more of that and women are not going to be as emotionally as available. And that's a really tricky one.
Mm-hmm.
And, when the women are resigned with those frustrations, those big sighs, really, again, whatever that emotional tone might be, I think this is really an opportunity because on the one hand, you're asking the woman there, assuming kind of typical gender roles in dynamics. But on the one hand, you're asking the woman, hey, be more aware of your tone when your partner reaches towards you in an effort of connection. And I'm going to flip that a little bit. And if you're the man and you're getting some consistent rejection, rather than saying, my wife is rejecting me, she's being a bitch, she's never going to want sex, I feel so sad, what's wrong? The invitation here is to be curious instead of, how could I get my wife to have more sex with me? It's, what would my wife need to feel more safe, to feel more seen so that she's more available?
Yeah, I do love that reframe.
I think that's a really, really important reframe. And I've worked with clients over the years whose husbands have said, I want more sex, period. And I'm like, well, why don't you ask him to ask you what you would need to be available for more sex? So it's a helpful question to consider if you're stuck in this dynamic. And look, so much what we're talking about right now is the initiation part. Because I think that's one of the biggest barriers.
Well, the other thing that crosses my mind is we're also trying to address sex across couples that have completely different dynamics. Like you're going to have a completely different dynamic if you were newly partnered, if you just started dating versus if you just got married versus if you just have kids or if you've got young children versus if you've been married for 20 years and the resentments have accumulated over a couple decades. And we see the gamut in the clients that we see along that spectrum. And so the issues kind of change a little bit depending on where you are and how much hurt is accumulated.
Right. I think it's really important to, add on to that life stage situation, the challenges that arise that feel out of our control as we get into kind of, for women, the menopausal life stage, or for men, maybe some ED concerns. And those are embarrassing to talk about for many people. And it is also hard because sometimes there's not much we can do with those changes in our bodies and how to be more mindful of the sensitivity of some of those topics, because that can greatly affect desire, even if you have desire.
Well, and I know for men, like erectile dysfunction brings a lot of shame with it that, for whatever reason, we associate our ability to be virile and get hard with our worth as a man. For those men that are listening, I just want to say that Viagra is a fantastic drug. And it's not only a great drug for ED, there's also a study
this is big pharma at its best,
that
by the way.
showed that they were using AI to look at what are some off-brand approaches or uses of different drugs. And one of the things they discovered was Viagra is also good at preventing Alzheimer's.
Of course, big pharma would have erectile dysfunction medication help Alzheimer's
In men.
in men.
It's so unfair.
That just makes me laugh. And, I think for women who's especially going through menopause, vaginal dryness can be a sign of, oh, maybe I'm not interested, when in fact, it's simply just changes in your body that aren't your fault. So noticing areas of shame on some of these body changes, how safely can we name this to our partner and say, hey, I'm feeling embarrassed about this. I'm feeling sad about my aging, or, let's do some workarounds. Because again, if you have a very narrow definition of sex as simply intercourse, it might make some of those things really difficult. But maybe if you broaden the definition, it might help to start grease the wheels, so to speak, pun intended, around creating better pathways. What are you thinking about? I see your eyes moving.
Yeah, I'm thinking about sharing a little bit of our sex life. It's not too bad, but one of the things that Joree and I talk about a lot, and one of the things we do with some regularity, is we will spend 2, 3, 4 hours in bed listening to music, touching, talking, tickling, laughing, and so we're being intimate on every possible level. And afterwards, we usually go and get something to eat, and we wonder and comment about how many other couples are actually doing anything like this. And granted, I get this, if you've got young kids, this is off, like it's just never going to happen. I get that. However, it's a really good goal to shoot for, I would argue, assuming safety, because I think, one of the goals in a secure relationship is that there's a great deal of safety to bring up anything, safety to share how you feel, safety from this idea of non-defensive listening, practicing non-defensive listening, but that safety to know that your partner has your back pretty much no matter what. And so when you've got that safety, it allows for this much deeper form of intimacy.
Right.
And so that was what was on my mind.
It wasn't too bad.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad.
Well, and I think we've prioritized our time together. And, even if it's just sitting out in the hot tub for an hour and talking, or sitting by the fire, or playing cards, we prioritize connection. We prioritize quality time. And that's something we make a conscious choice to create. And when you do that and you feel more connected, then sex is a natural extension of that. It's not the initial point of connection. And I think that's what many couples, frankly, don't have the time to do. Right. And so,
but you got to carve out the time to do it also.
And I think that's the point I was going to make, is you're never going to find the time. You've got to prioritize and create the time, which is why Esther Perel talks about putting sex on the calendar and scheduling it. And that may not feel very romantic, but it's a commitment, and it makes a priority in your partner.
Tell the listeners about the 2 types of arousal that just crossed my mind. Was it?
They're spontaneous. Oh gosh, what's it?
And reactionary, or
now the
it's one that develops over time.
So some resources on this, and perhaps we can put some links in the show notes, is any of the work done by Emily Nagoski. Sorry, Amelia and Emily wrote the book Burnout. Emily Nagoski has written a couple of books. One is called, their book together is Burnout. One is called Come Together, and the other one is called Come As You Are. And there's the spontaneous arousal that you are hoping your body's just naturally going to do, in point of like, oh my God, he's so hot, and now I'm ready to go. And I'm forgetting the other word at the moment.
And the phrase isn't as important as the idea. And the idea is that arousal can build over time if you just like lay in bed together, maybe unclothed or clothed, and touch each other, kiss. Like the arousal will follow suit.
Well, and in her book, Come Together, she talks about the blueprint, your relationship blueprint. And she talks about it being like actually rooms in a house, and how the sex room or sensuality or intimacy room is a room, and we don't often spend a lot of times in that room as couples, and especially in this culture that glorifies busyness. And so to literally like draw out the blueprint of your relationship house and to see what rooms are in the way of that intimacy room. You might have the work room, the family room, the kid room, the chores, and we realize, where do we spend most of our energy and time? And the further away that room is in that blueprint of that house, you got to work towards getting closer to that room. And I mean, we can talk about so many levels of this, of how stress affects our ability and our desire and our capacity to be present,
How anger affects it.
Right. I mean, so there's so many factors to be considered. And this is in large part what we talk about in our masterclass series, right? Are all the barriers to connection, anger, stress, inability to be in the present moment,
or communication,
right? Communication challenges, socialization issues, attachment wounds, not having gratitude and appreciation for your partner, not having an ability to be compassionate for where they're at. If we're not addressing all these other areas, then of course, sex is going to be a hard thing to feel connected and available for. And then, because we're just kind of going through this laundry list of things that are just coming to mind, let's assume that you have created and carved out the time and that you feel safe and emotionally present. One of the things we see in a lot of couples, and I will say was a challenge for us at the beginning, was the ability to receive without constantly feeling like you needed to give back. And that's a practice.
And it's a really good one to be aware of, giving versus receiving. And can you just receive without doing anything else, but just receive pleasure from your partner?
Yeah.
Because it's, for most of us, I would argue, it's not that easy. Like it actually takes some patience. It takes some practice. It takes some awareness that it's okay. Like you have to give yourself permission to just lay back and receive.
Right. So we've covered a lot of areas without really going in depth into each one, but I'm really hoping that you listening maybe heard just one thing to begin to look at a little bit deeper, to be curious about, to maybe to come and talk to your partner about, if you have the desire for greater intimacy. Oh, he just rolled his eyes.
I was just thinking, or talk to your partner and come.
Okay, there's that too.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what we didn't talk about?
What?
I'm interrupting myself, which I tend to do at times. Sex does not have to be serious.
Oh, laughter.
Laughter. And when we first started dating, there was this one particular time where we were laughing so hard in the middle of sex.
Yeah.
And it was shocking to both of us. Like, wait, you don't have to be like serious. You don't have to be all focused.
You're not trying to look cool.
Right. Because I'm sure we
or
did
sexy
not, right now.
Yeah.
But it was authentic and to be playful. But again, if you want to be playful in intimacy, where else are you practicing playfulness in other areas of your life? I mean, one of the things that John has brought really big into my life is laughter and silliness and taking myself less seriously. And if you can't do that in other areas, if you're always stoic or put together, right? I mean, it's an extension of that.
Yeah.
But again, I'll go back to what I was saying is, ideally there's just one thing that you as a listener heard that might pique your curiosity of, let me look at that. What are the areas that I would like to develop more safety around? Is it communication? Is it expressing, how about just expressing what you need or what you want or what you like? If you can't say what you want to do on a Saturday afternoon as an activity because your partner is going to reject your idea of what fun looks like, you're likely not going to feel safe to speak up in the bedroom.
Yeah. And I think another possible good way to start for some couples is to just talk about, what does sex mean to you?
Yeah.
Because it's a really multi-layered answer for most of us. It's not just an orgasm. It's about connection. It's about repair. It's about intimacy. It's about safety. It's about pleasure.
Could be a stress reliever for many.
Yeah.
An emotion release.
Positive emotional boost.
And crying during sex, that's something that I never really knew was an experience, but it's an emotional release. And if we have a safe basis in our relationship for expressing ourselves, there's a lot more depths you can go in your experiences. But I'm really curious of not just how to have couples have better sex, but how to create the foundation and the context and the conditions so that better sex is inevitable. I mean, that's the goal here. And because I don't want to attach to frequency, I don't want to attach to orgasms, I don't want to attach to, it has to look a certain way. And that's why I think it's important to define with your partner, what does it look like to you? What's important to you? And start there and be really gracious in what you hear as a response.
All right. Should we wrap up now?
We should wrap up.
All right. Well, thank you for your attention. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. Yes.
And if you would like to get more access into looking at these things deeper, check out the link in the show notes for our masterclass series.
Always.
We have it each month, and you can sign up for the whole year and get a bonus coaching session with us, or you can sign up individually for whatever topic piques your interest. And we also are available to work with couples who are wanting to deepen their connection and heal and repair those old wounds so that they can have the most connected, authentic, happy, fulfilling relationship possible. It is possible. It takes a little bit of work at times, but if that's what you're desiring, we're available to support you on that journey.
And that's it for this episode of Love Isn't Enough.